I do kind of feel like Batman on with like all these different microphones and stuff. So that feels pretty cool. But what I want to talk about today is a little something called destiny. I want to talk through some stories from my life and kind of correlate them to education and see if I can inspire you guys a little bit. So first we want to talk about what is this thing called destiny. And so I always like to use online tools, web-based tools. So I use Merriam-Webster's online dictionary when I look things up. So this is Merriam-Webster's definition of destiny. And so there's always some element of something was predetermined or was preordained, right? That this was going to happen. And so my personal belief on that is that there are certain things that are supposed to happen that you're supposed to do. But part of how you get there is the choices that you make, the experiences that you have, and that there's a path that navigates that may make that destiny more fulfilling or more influential across the board. And so part of those experiences and the things that you go through define what that destiny actually is going to fully encompass. One aspect of that is that when you're going forward, when you're in the path, you don't always know which branch of the path to take, right? There might be all these different angles, there might be these different opportunities. You might be having a huge decision that you have to decide one way or the other. And it's not real clear, right? But after you get through all those decisions and you get down the path, if you turn around, you can start to connect the dots and you can start to see that there was a reason why you took that path. There was a reason why you took that turn or you made that decision. It starts to become clear when you're looking backwards. It's challenging when you're looking forwards. So I want to start with going back to why you got into education in the first place. And I think sometimes we start to lose sight of why we're here, why we originally got into education, because there's so many other things, so many other pieces and aspects that start to get weighing down on us. And I think if we can always remember to go back and understand why we originally got in education. So I'm going to tell you my story of how I ended up in education, which is kind of a little odd. I grew up with both my parents working in education. My mom was a second and third grade teacher. My father was a district level administrator. It was around education my whole life. Never once occurred to me that I might want to go into the education field. Not a chance, like never thought about it. One of the great things about both my parents is that they didn't push me or my brother into a certain direction, whether it was sports, whether it was career, college. They just supported us and gave us information and helped us try to make that decision for ourselves. And so I think they really love the fact that I'm in education now, but they never would have pushed me or wanted me to go that route. So it just never occurred to me. I came down to go to Texas A&M. Whoop! Shh. And started out in engineering. My secret plan was I was going to get an engineering job at a big engineering firm. I was going to make a whole bunch of money. I was going to move back to Alaska. I was going to buy a whole bunch of land. I was going to hunt and fish and live my days out in the wilderness of Alaska, being pretty simple, right? Well, one thing I found out was I really didn't like engineering. Didn't really like my professors. They didn't really like me. Their focus when you first start out in engineering is trying to narrow down the size of the classes, right? There's too many kids in those programs, so they got to weed you out. So they're not really overly trying to help me succeed. They're like, well, Doyle, not so much. Maybe you should think about something else. So that's what I did. Ended up going into the business school, got a business degree, and had no idea what I was going to do when I graduated and got my degree. But my wife had just started in the Teach for America program and had been assigned in Houston. And so I packed up all my stuff, moved to Houston, and said, great, it's a huge city. I'm going to have all kinds of job opportunities in Houston, right? Yeah, so I started sending out all of my applications, putting out my resume, making all these connections, trying to find something. In the meantime, we were engaged. I needed some sort of income, right, to try and at least look like I was going to be a husband that could take care of some aspect of life. And so started, waiting tables, bartending, even started substitute teaching for a while. There's actually some funny stories about my first substitute teaching gigs, but that's a whole other keynote. So there was one critical thing that happened when I was in Houston that really kind of changed my direction. Does anybody remember a company called Enron? Enron fell apart like literally a month after I moved to Houston. What did that do? It flooded the entire Houston market with very experienced workers that needed a job. Bryan Doyle, no experience. Enron person that has 30 years of experience. Yeah, we're going to go with this guy. So pretty much all the jobs dried up overnight. And I kind of decided, I didn't really like Houston that much anyway, right? It's too humid, it's too muggy. Let's see if we can go someplace else. So we started looking where we might go, where we might end up after Kelly got out of Teach for America. Well, her family's from Austin. So we started looking in the Austin area. And I was thinking Dell, Intel, Sigma-Tel, one of these Tels. Again, let's go, get into the tech support role, get into the IT department, try and make some money. At that point, Kelly wasn't a big fan of moving back to Alaska and living in the wilderness. So that was kind of off the table, but I figured maybe we can still do something if I get a really good job there. So started looking. I came across this posting in Bastrop ISD. I said, hey, Kelly, this is that place with all the pine trees. When we drive through and we're going tubing. Remember that? That'd be all right. It'd be a nice place. We could go there. So I applied, went in and interviewed. On my way back from Houston, I called Kelly and I said, they are never going to hire me. That was the worst interview I've ever had in my life. I felt like a little girl. It was terrible. There's no way I'm getting this job. Before I made it back home, they called me and they said, hey, you want to come work in Bastrop ISD? And I was like, yes, I'll take it. I'll take anything. So I moved in with my in-laws in Austin because Kelly was still finishing up everything in Teach for America in Houston, and started working for Bastrop ISD. Literally remember walking in the door going, I got 3 to 6 months. Then I'm out the door. I'm going to one of those Tels. I'm going to Sigma-Tel, Intel, somebody. This is just a short hop in the road, right? And then I started working in the school district. I started working in the classrooms. I started seeing the kids. And I started thinking about, someday, I'm going to have this little guy. And what do I want that to look like for him? And all of a sudden I started to realize why my parents had given so much of their lives to education. And it started to become more meaningful for me. And I sat down and said, you know what? I don't need I don't need all this money. I don't need to go work in high tech just to do that. I want to make a difference. I want to make change. I want to inspire. I want to innovate. And this was the opportunity. And so I started working in Bastrop, and the more I was there, the more I just felt like things needed to change. The status quo needed to change. There were so many things that were, could be improved upon that I just couldn't get there. So I had to try and work up to different areas where I could influence more of that, and I could make a difference. I could be the change. I could get that done. And so it really started to confirm for me that that's where I needed to go, was in education, and that was I stand here now 10 years still in education, can't think of working in any other field, and we have to try and make it better. And so I want us to think about the gravity of education in general and what we're doing. And I think it's such a big system, and there are so many levels to it, and there's so many places where the system can fail, the system can get bogged down, and we lose focus of that original reason that we got into education. The little guys, right? The kids. And so one of the things I want to think about is standardized testing part of the destiny for our kids? I think that's part of our system that we need to work on, right? You want to get the star reference there? So one of the things that makes America special, right, is that we've always innovated. We've always changed things. We've always pushed the limits. So I was reading this article recently, and it had a couple of really neat quotes in there. That are we just continuing to repetitively enhance things? And so that to me immediately jumped out as our accountability system. We all know it's not working well, right? But we don't seem to try to take that next step. And so the other quote I liked in here was, if we want to go to the moon, we can't just keep improving the train. We got to build the rocket, right? And so if we want to get to the next level, can we just keep improving the standardized test? Can we just keep improving the accountability system? Or do we need to build the rocket? And so I'm really excited about the new Texas High Performing Schools Consortium that's going to be working on creating a new accountability system for the state. And I'm really hoping that that group can get out there and build the rocket and not just try and enhance the system that we have. Because we have to think different. That's what got America where we are. So we think different. We don't just do the same thing and continue to manage it. We want our kids to stand on our shoulders and do amazing things, right? That's what we're all about. We've got the greatest country in the world, and we've got to continue to foster that innovation and foster that change and not be just willing to accept that this is what we have and we're just going to have to deal with it. And so one of the things I always talk about with the people I work with is control yourself. Worry about you. If everybody takes care of the pieces that they control, then the system can work. What happens is we start to worry about all these things outside this sphere that we can control. And we start trying to influence those. We start trying to have conversations. We start pointing fingers about what's not getting done over there, what's not getting done over here. What happens to everything inside that sphere? We start neglecting that. We start letting that fall apart. And that's on us. We got to control those pieces, and we got to remember that if the system's going to work, we all got to do our part, and we got to have our ducks in a row. We got to have everything in our place lined out and working well. And so, does anybody know where this quote is from? So it's from the Dr. Seuss book, The Lorax. So this is actually a really, I love this quote. It's really big at our KIPP schools. That's one thing that we put up a lot. In fact, we have some T-shirts that say "unless" on them, and it's a reminder of this quote. That we're walking around and I see you wearing the shirt, you see me wearing the shirt. It reminds us that we got to be the one that's going to make it better. It's on us. We got to focus on what we can do our part, take care of it, and it'll get better. Do anybody know what this is from? Polar Express, right? Does anybody know what that bell is? Remember the story with the bell? So Santa gave him the bell for Christmas, right? You can only hear the bell if you believe, okay? Think about that with education. I would say, in some cases, the longer we're in education, the less that bell starts ringing for us. The less we start hearing it because we're not believing in it as much. We're not believing that we can still change it, that we can make it better. But we can. We've got to remember why we came here. What did we start? Why did we get into education? And we got to try and stay away from things like the CYA mentality. Someone once told me that I'm not good at CYA. And I said, I don't need to be good at CYA as long as you do your job, right? I don't need to be worried about whether I have proof that I did something or that I told you something or showed you something, because I trust you and we're working together, right? I think that's one of these aspects that can get in the way and hold us up, because we're worried about all this extra documentation, we're worried about somebody not getting something, not following up, not working with us. So we're not controlling those pieces that we need to control, that we have, that we can handle, that we can change, because we're worried about these other pieces and what might happen. And then the other piece is, cynicism, right? So again, I would say cynicism kind of goes up on a chart with your years of experience in education too, in some instances, that the longer you're there, the more cynical you may become, right? More tired of the frustration, the inability to get certain things done. The way to fight that is to remember why we're here. Why did we get there? Why did we start? We got to go back to our roots. We got to remember it's about the kids and focus on those kids and continue to fight, continue to try and build the rocket, not just make the incremental changes. So the next piece I want to talk about is a story from my childhood. So this is actually a picture from my front porch. If you look really close, right over the top of that, you can see Russia. Okay? Just kidding. So I did grow up in Alaska. This is not my front porch, obviously. This is a picture from the Alaska Range. I actually took this picture about 5 years ago on a hunting trip with my dad. This is about 10,000 feet up on the top of the little mountain that we were on, looking across this glacier in this valley. But my point here is that I grew up in Alaska, and that my childhood was a little bit different in some aspects than the childhood you may have had in Texas or other areas of the South. But lots of snow, lots of ice, think cold weather. So this is actually me. When I was 6 years old, I was out on at a friend's house, and I was out we were playing out in the snow, went down to a frozen pond, and we were playing on it. Started throwing snowballs. What's on a frozen pond? Ice, right? Some ice got in a snowball, somebody threw it at me, hit me in the eye. Changed my path significantly, okay? So if you look, you kind of see something over here on this side, that's a patch over my eye, because I had just had eye surgery. So I found my way back to the house, which was challenging. I call my mom. We get in the car because we live in Wasilla, which is about an hour away from Anchorage, which is the biggest city in Alaska, the only place that had a doctor that could work on eyes, right? So they drive me up to Anchorage, and they get me in. I see this doctor, and he's like, "Oh my gosh, we got to get you into emergency surgery, right away." So they take me in to surgery, and what I really need is a new cornea because it's cut. Bless you. But nobody in Alaska can really do that surgery, and on top of that, to get a new cornea, you have to be on a transplant list. You had to wait back then. Nowadays, it's actually a lot quicker. You can basically just schedule surgery and go in and do it. But back then, you had to wait, and it could be years. It was all based on priority and availability. And so the best thing they could do was just sew my eye up and send me home. One thing about eyes is that eyes are very sympathetic. So if you have an injury in one eye, sometimes your other eye will react much the same symptoms that the injured eye does. So I came home after that surgery and for whatever reason couldn't open my left eye. So I had to sit in bed for like 2 or 3 weeks without being able to see anything. And believe it or not, the reason I finally was able to motivate myself to get my left eye back working right, Saturday morning cartoons. I told my mom, I was like, I'm watching Saturday cartoons, Mom. And so I remember waking up that day, and I was staying at my grandmother's house, and I just kind of rolled over, and it was like, I'm looking at the room, and I'm sitting there, and it took me like 10 minutes to figure out that like something was different. And then it was like, hey, I can see again. And so I get out of bed, and I like sprint down the hallway to the TV, and I turn on the TV, start watching Saturday morning cartoons. And my eye was like tearing and watering and all this because it was still kind of, just acting strange. But boy, I watched Saturday morning cartoons. That was the motivation for me on that one. So one of the things that having that injury did for me was made me have to be real careful about the safety of my eyes and not being able to play certain sports or do certain activities. When you're down one eye, you really don't want anything to happen to that eye, but you really don't want anything to happen to the working eye. And so my parents were like, really wanted to put me in a bubble, but tried not to. And I thank them for that, because being bubble boy would not be very fun, I don't think. So, but one of the things I had to do was wear a lot of these like protective eyewear things. So I want to show you guys some of the stylish eyewear I got to wear. So that's for soccer, and then this was basketball. So when I was like this age, it wasn't that big of a deal. Like I was just like, oh, I'm just going to go play basketball. That's what I got to do. Anyone ever go to middle school? These are not the kinds of goggles you want to be wearing in middle school, okay? So I got there, and I would deal with it. I'll go play with it, but people are like, oh, here comes Goggle Boy or something, And that was tough, but I would still play. But the harder part was like certain sports, my parents and my doctors were like, just no. I grew up in Alaska. Hockey was a big deal. I always wanted to play hockey. I think I would have been in the NHL. I had that sort of talent. But I remember like in 4th grade or something, I came home and I was like, look, here's all the stuff we need. It's a helmet, there's this mask, they put this, eye guard on, and my parents just looked at me and were like, you're not ever playing hockey. Just get that thought out of your head. And so I really wanted to play football in high school. They wouldn't let me play football. So my brother was on the swim team, and I said, it's swimming. Please, let me go do swimming. I don't have to, everybody's wearing goggles in swimming, right? I'll fit right in. And so, sure enough, they let me on the swim team, but they're like, you can't compete. We don't want you to race. Because they were worried when I would dive off the blocks that the pressure with the goggles was going to mess up my eyes. So I said, sure. First meet registration came up, my name was on that list. I just went with my brother. I was like, I'm going to go watch Tim. Took all my gear. I competed. Came home, told my parents, I'm good. Eyes didn't pop out. Everything's fine. Goggles worked. I can swim the rest of this time. So that ended up being my big sport. I swam all 4 years in high school. And it worked out well, but I always kind of had this in the back of my mind, like, why didn't I get to, play football? Why didn't I get to play hockey? Why me? And so I've had a number of surgeries over the years, and I've had 3 different cornea transplants at this point. I don't know, I think I'm up to like 12 eye surgeries or something. So it's something that's just stayed with me forever. I always kind of have to keep in the back of my mind and worry about that eye. And it's just kind of like, why? Why me? Why'd I have to deal with that? And so that all started to become a little more clear for me because of another experience that had to start on August 25th, 2009, which was this little man. So this is my youngest son. That earlier picture is my older son, Jack. This is Robert. Robert was born, went full term in everything, made it through all of the doctor's visits, all the checkups, nothing wrong. All of the what they call the scans, the sketches, sonograms, all the sonograms. There we go. So everything came back. Even the big, what's it like, the 4-month or the 6-month, where they do all the measurements and they actually go in and they measure all the fluid spaces in the brain, they measure the spine and everything. Everything was good. Everything was right. Went full term. He's born. We're excited. He's going through, what's the name of that? He's at that first little standardized test that he has to take where they check all the motions, they measure his head. And he got like a subpar rating on that first test he took. They said his head was too big. And I was like, look at me. I got not as big a head as some other people in this room, but I got a big head, right? So it wasn't anything I was worried about. So we take him over to the nursery. The nurses, we're giving him the first bath, we're getting him all wrapped up, put his little hat on. And she's putting his hat on and she's just kind of looking at his head. She's like, did they say anything about how big his head was? I was like, yeah. They said he's in the 99th percentile. I was like, he's big. He's got a big head. And she goes, well, yeah, that's something we usually are worried about. And she said, look, his fontanelle is swollen. And I'm like, what are you talking about? What's a fontanelle? I don't know anything about this. I said, can I take him back to the room now? And she's like, well, let me try and get a hold of one of the pediatricians so we can see. And I'm like so impressed with that nurse because I was like giving her hell. Like, come on, I want to take my baby back to my wife. And she stayed with it. She couldn't get a hold of our pediatrician. And so she finally had to track down the on-call pediatrician for the hospital. But we were in there for like an hour and a half waiting for this. And so finally she gets a hold of the pediatrician and says, okay, if it's all this stuff, we just need to do a ultrasound in the morning of his head and see if everything looks okay. And so I'm like, all right, whatever. Go back, spend, the whole night up with the baby, just like normal. Taking turns trying to make sure Kelly's doing all right and feeling good, and Robert's doing all right, feeling good. They come in, they do the ultrasound of his head in the morning. And so I'm out there like checking with the radiologist that's doing it, and it's like they finish up the scan and everything, and all of a sudden they just give me this look. And I'm like, we're good, right? Her expression kind of changes. She flashes a smile and says, I don't really read the picture. Your doctor will come in and tell you if it's good or bad or what's going on. And so I said, okay. And I was, at that point, it didn't really cross my mind, but now I can go back and I can remember that first look. And I was like, you look at these pictures, 100 times a day, you know what looks right and what doesn't look right. So whether there was a diagnosis or something, she wasn't going to make it, but she knew something wasn't right? So later that day, this is what we found out we were probably dealing with. Our pediatrician, or the on-call pediatrician from our office came and said, his ventricles are bigger than they should be. I said, what's a ventricle? So she started talking to us about his brain, and the ventricles are actually the fluid spaces in your brain. Those are those things that in that 4-month or 6-month or whatever the big ultrasound sonogram is, that's one of the things that they're looking at, is they're measuring those ventricles in the brain to see if they're the right size or if they're too big or too small. And what that fluid is CSF fluid that flows between your brain and your spinal column and keeps everything healthy and alive. Different points it's produced, and at different points it's absorbed and drained, and so there's this flow to the whole system. Well, on this side you can see the ventricles, the blue is fairly small, and on that side it's oversized. So in hydrocephalus, that fluid, there's something keeping that fluid from draining out properly or flowing down into the spinal column and getting reabsorbed. And so that fluid builds up. Fluid doesn't compress real well. Bone doesn't compress real well. Brain, in between fluid and skull, compresses. So as those ventricles get bigger, it gets bad, okay? That fontanelle she's talking about is that soft spot. that babies have because their skull hasn't closed all the way. And so that allows the fluid to kind of expand that area and provide a little bit of relief when that's happening, when that fluid's taken on. So the doctor tells us this is what it could be. You need to go see a neurosurgeon. I'm going, a neurosurgeon? Like, wow, this is, crazy. And so this is what we're thinking. You're going the general fix, is we've got a great neurosurgeon here in town. You're going to go over there. They're going to be able to put this little drain in, and it'll drain the fluid and everything. So turn around, start. She leaves. We're just there, me, Kelly, and Robert, with all of this information to try and deal with. So after a lot of why, it turned into research mode, like what is hydrocephalus, what is a ventricle, what is all this stuff. I learned more about brains in the next 48, 72 hours than I ever dreamed I would know about brains. And we made an appointment with the neurosurgeon. So we took Robert home the next day from the hospital. We had an appointment with the neurosurgeon the day after. Went in. He sits us down. He tells us, Robert has hydrocephalus. This is what we have to do. We've got to go in and put the shunt in. We need to do it as fast as possible. 9 days old, take my baby in. Neurosurgeon, does brain surgery. This is a guy I've known for 3 days. Operating on my son's brain. A lot more, why? It was, very tough, but when I look back, there was another time when I asked a lot of whys. That was when I was dealing with my eye. And when I look back, I can see that path was aligned to where one of the reasons why I went through all the things I went through was to get me ready to take care of Robert. Because I know hospitals like the back of my hand. I know how to deal with doctors really well. I know how to ask the right questions, and I know that sometimes we just have to accept that this is where we're at and this is what we have to deal with. And so I felt a little bit better equipped going through that than I would have been had I not dealt with a lot of the things I dealt with growing up. So that was part of me being prepared to take care of Robert. So one of the things you're probably wondering is, Bryan, what in the world does this have to do with education? So the first point on this is, when we're in classrooms, when we're in schools, we don't always know the life experiences or the challenges or the things that our students have had to deal with or have had to go through before they came to our classroom, before they came to our class. And we have to understand that they might have had extraordinary circumstances just to get to your class. And that we have to take them and support them and love them and get them to where they need to go without maybe knowing that. And we can't treat them all in different ways without, we don't know that they've had these experiences, and so we've got to take care of all kids as best we can. And so all means all, right? I've seen a lot of mission statements. Most of them talk about all kids. All kids can learn. All kids can succeed. None of them that I've seen say all asterisk kids can succeed, asterisk below, except for, the LEP, the ELL, the special ed. There's no asterisks down there. We say all in the mission statement because we're going to take care of all kids, right? That's one of the things that makes our education system great. That separates us from a lot of these other education systems out there that people say are doing amazing things and getting amazing results, is that we take care of all kids. We educate all kids. All means all. And so I wish we could dump those labels. I wish we could drop all of the subpopulations, the categories and everything. Because what ends up happening is that gives us the opportunity to make an excuse or say, well, they came from this background, or they have, this, they're special ed, or they have this, so that's why I couldn't get them to the level that they needed to. It's an easier way for me to kind of make an excuse for maybe my shortcomings or something. And so I wish we could just drop those labels. They're all kids. Learn the kids, know the kids, see the kids. But second grade didn't do their job getting them ready for third grade. So I couldn't get them to where they needed to be in third grade because second grade. It wasn't me. You guys ever heard that before?
Yep.
I hear that a lot, especially in like classrooms or at a school where we just did a benchmark or something and we're not at where we need to be, right? All of a sudden but the kids weren't ready. It was the other teachers, it was the kids. We're blaming instead of saying, going back and looking at why do we get into education? For the kids. We want to take care of the kids, we want to inspire the kids, we want to move them forward. Don't blame the kids. It's not their fault. We're supposed to inspire them. If they don't, if the problem is they don't have any desire to learn physics, that's why we got into physics teaching, right? It was to inspire kids to learn about physics. So isn't it a little hypocritical to turn around and say, well, they just don't want to learn about physics. I can't teach these guys. Okay? So we got to own it. We got to sit down and say, how do I do it better? What did I need to do differently to inspire them to learn about physics? They don't know anything about engines. We don't have to fix engines that much these days. What can I do to try and inspire them to fix engines? Back in the day, people learned a lot more about engines, I think, because engines broke down. It was an inspiration to get your engine fixed so you could get where you needed to go. So people learned more about engines. Today, we don't have that problem as much. So we got to sit down and find out, how do we inspire the kids to learn what we want them to learn? That's what we signed up for, right? That's what the core part of teaching is. Inspire them to learn. Get them where they need to go, whether they're behind or not. Learn who the kids are, learn where they're at, learn their experiences, connect with them, and get them there. That's how we can solve this problem. But we got to stop seeing the kids as their label or their, group. And we got to try and raise our game, move beyond the stage and the stage, find out how we inspire them, find out how we get them where they need to go, and get them to be excited about physics, get them to be excited about engines. So I managed to make it through my entire educational career growing up hating history. Hated history. All we did was memorize names and memorize dates, and then I threw it all back up for the test. So all we did in history, it was so boring. I could figure out the dates, I could memorize them, I could pass all the tests, but I never learned about the story. I never learned what actually happened. I never had any interest to learn because we were just worrying about the dates. We were worried about the name of the place. So I made it all the way through till my very last history class that I had to take at A&M. I had a professor named Dr. Kramer. And he embodied this, I'm going to inspire you to learn about history, to love history. I'm going to get you to that level. I don't know where you came from. I don't know what you've done. You're going to like history when you leave my class. And by golly, I did. He was one of the most amazing teachers I've ever been around. And one of the things he would do, we didn't focus on dates. We didn't focus on the names. We focused on the story. And so he would bring in people that lived through whatever experience we were studying to tell us their story. And that makes it so much more powerful. And this is one of the aspects where, with all the available technology that we have today, we should really be doing more of this in the classrooms, of bringing people in to tell their story to our kids. And it's so easy now. I mean, he had to go out and actually physically track these people down, figure out how to get them to College Station. I know everybody loves to go to College Station all the time, but he had to get them in there. But he had a Holocaust survivor come in and tell his story to us about living through a concentration camp. There's no way You can study the Holocaust or the concentration camp and get the feeling of what it was like without hearing this man and hearing the feeling in his voice, the emphasis on different things, on what his experience actually was like. We had Korean War veterans come in and tell us about their experiences and their stories. We had, what did he call it, a dope-smoking, wild-eyed hippie that lived in the counterculture, I believe, here in Austin. Back in the day, they came in, who was actually a professor at A&M at that time, would come in and he would tell about the counterculture and tell that whole story. That meant a lot more to me. All of a sudden, it was like I've heard about that all the time, but it didn't become real to me until I heard someone tell about their story living through it. And so that's one of those ways where we can move beyond the sage and the stage, and we can bring the kids in and we can inspire them to want to learn about that. I walked out of that class going, I got to start reading about history. I got to go, I've read, these huge, giant 1,500, page books about World War II now that I would have been like, yeah, I'm not touching a 1,500 page book about, history. But I've like, where I can't put it down now because I'm like into the story and I want to know more about it. We got to try and do that for all our kids. We got to try and do that with all teachers. And so one of our roles as leaders in our districts and at our campuses is to work to remind our teachers that that's what we're supposed to do, that we need to be inspiring and pushing for all kids to learn and all kids to understand, because it's easy to forget about that, and it's easy to start making those excuses or pointing to those labels or doing different things. Even great teachers, it's easy to try and get to that point, to get frustrated, and we've got to try and remind them as leaders that this is what we've got to do, this is how we get to the next level. We've got to love them, we've got to inspire them, and again, we don't always know where they've been or what they've dealt with. One of the things for Robert is that I'll be there always behind him. But not all kids have a strong family or a strong support system to help them get through things. And so our teachers, our administrators, our campus has to be that family for them for the limited amount of time that we see them, because that might be the only part of that day that they get some love. And so we've got to inspire those kids, we've got to love them, we've got to take care of them, we've got to bring them in and get them to that next level. Because all means all, right? Not all asterisks, all means all. So this is a quote I had posted on the door to my office for the last, 8 months, 10 months, something like that. Has anybody seen that? Do they know where that came from? Steve Jobs. It was in his commencement speech at Stanford. This was one of the ways I kind of reminded myself. That's why I put it on my door to my office. So one of the, if I came back and I was frustrated or something didn't go right, this would remind me and re-gear me and go back. This is what I want to do. This is why I'm here. This is where I want to go. Don't let the noise of others' opinions drown out your own inner voice. You already know what you want to become. It's there. It's inside. You just got to find it. You got to, manage those pieces that you can control and get you to that level and take you to that end game where we're taking care of all kids. And so we have to remember why we're here. We have to continually be able to go back to the beginning, find our roots, and remember that this is what it's about, guys. It's not about CYA. It's not about, struggling with the cynicism, getting frustrated. It's not about standardized testing. It's about preparing these guys for the life that they're going to live and making them as successful as possible. And part of that is pulling them in and supporting them and giving them that supportive structure to where they can get to that point and where they will have that support because they might not have it at home. And so we've got to go out and chase our destiny. Find out where that path leads. When you look back, you'll realize this is where you're supposed to be. So, thank you.